So The Look of Silence is about a brother of a man who was killed in a genocide in Indonesia. In 1965 in Indonesia, the army overthrew the government with the help of the whole West, for essentially the United States, the United Kingdom. They overthrew the government and killed or imprisoned the entire Indonesian left, somewhere between 500,000 and 2.5 million people on the left, trade unionists, members of the women's movement, artists, intellectuals, members of the Communist Party, the ethnic Chinese were killed within something like 6 months. And the killers have been in power ever since. And the film focuses on one family of survivors, and in particular the youngest brother of a victim, who goes and confronts all of the men who were involved with murdering his brother. And this is something unimaginable in Indonesia because the killers are still holding power. They're still running the country. When he confronts them, he's an optometrist. His job is to go door to door testing people's eyes. And as he confronts the men who killed his brother, he tests their eyes. And it creates these extraordinary moments where the perpetrators refuse to admit the moral meaning of what they've done. They refuse to see the moral meaning of what they've done while speaking to a man whose profession it is to help people see. The film, The Look of Silence, is the companion piece to another film I made called The Act of Killing, which played here 2 years ago. Yes, in fact, the inspiration for both films is a scene in The Look of Silence where two men take me down to a river, taking turns playing victim and perpetrator, showing me enthusiastically how they would kill, how they killed 10,500 people at one spot. And when I filmed this in January 2004, I had this awful feeling when I saw the boastful way that they were talking, the way that they were clearly, although they'd never met each other before, reading from a shared script. When I saw this, I had this awful feeling that I'd wandered into Germany 40 years after the Holocaust, only to find the Nazis still in power. This, I imagined, is how the Nazis would speak if they had won, and if the entire Western world had supported the Holocaust at the time of the Holocaust. And when I had that realization, and when I had the additional realization that this is not some strange exception to the rule on the other side of the world, but throughout the global South, perpetrators of mass violence have won and kept their societies in the grip of fear for decades and decades, and that the global economy depends on this fear. When I realized that, I realized that I would stop everything else I was doing and as many years of my life as it would take to address this in a film, to address the present-day impunity of the killers in a film and all of its consequences for the society. And actually, I knew right then, in January 2004, a year and a half before I met Anwar Congo, the main character in The Act of Killing, I knew I would make two films. One focused on the perpetrators, about the lies, the fantasies, the stories that the perpetrators cling to so that they can live with themselves, and which to such terrible effect they impose on the whole society. That inevitably became a film about escapism and guilt, and so it is appropriately, I think, a flamboyant kind of fever dream of a film. But I knew I would make a second film already then about what it does to ordinary human beings, to families, to mothers, to children, to their relationships, to memory, to have to live for 50 years in fear and in silence, unable to grieve, unable to heal. And that, of course, became The Look of Silence. In 2003, when I began working on the present-day legacy of the 1965 genocide, I started with the survivors, and I began with Adi's family. He was at the very center of my work. He was recruiting survivors from all around the region to tell their stories with me, to me. But shortly after we began that process, the army threatened the survivors not to participate in the film. And Adi at that point said, "Joshua, please don't give up. Try to film the perpetrators. See if they will tell you how they killed our relatives." Now, I was afraid to approach the perpetrators at first. It sounded dangerous and crazy for all sorts of reasons. But he sort of insisted, and when I did, I found to my horror that the perpetrators were open and boastful. When I showed this footage to Adi and then to the other survivors who wanted to see it, they all said you must continue to film the perpetrators because you're finding out what happened. But Adi said something a little bit different. He said, continue to film the perpetrators because if you can make a film where with the perpetrators, where the audience sees the way they boast and understands the impunity, which is the reason for their boasting, then anyone, anywhere in the world who sees this film will be forced to realize that not only did something happen that was terrible 45 years ago, or 50 years ago, but also that still today things are terrible, that in some terrible, important way, the genocide has not ended because the perpetrators remain in power and because everybody remains afraid. So Adi had the instinct that when he saw the boasting of the perpetrators, that I should make a film about impunity today. And so after he told me that, I felt entrusted by Adi, but then by the broader Indonesian human rights community, to do a work that they clearly could not safely do themselves. I spent the next 2 years filming every perpetrator I could find, including the perpetrators you see in The Look of Silence. And then I met Anwar Congo, the main character in The Act of Killing. He was the 41st perpetrator I filmed. I spent 5 years filming with him and the men around him to make The Act of Killing. Throughout those 7 years of filming, Adi would watch everything that I had time to show him. He would come to our house every day after filming and ask me or my crew to show him material. And so at the end of editing The Act of Killing in 2012, I knew I would then return to make the second film. And I did not know Adi would be the main character, but I knew already he would be my main collaborator, as indeed he was already one of my dearest friends, not just in Indonesia, but in the world.